Jay, a huge welcome to the Fitness and Lifestyle Podcast, man. It's a pleasure to have you on. I was fortunate enough to be a guest on the Storybox podcast. I think it was maybe roughly this time last year, and been meaning to get you on ever since. And I think there's a lot to unpack, man. So welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Dan, for having me on your show. It's a long time coming for sure, but hopefully I can bring your audience some value, man. So thanks for having me on.
I have no doubt that you will, man. You're from the outside in, you're a very interesting dude. I mean, you've had the opportunity to speak with a lot of people that also add a lot of value to people's lives from all different areas, which is incredible. And we'll touch on that in today's show. The first thing I wanted to ask you, man, is what led you to starting the Storybox podcast in the first place?
Well, that's a long answer. I'll try and concise it a little bit for your audience. But essentially, I started the Storybox way back in 2018 as a completely different model than what it is today. It fell flat on its face pretty quickly, 5 episodes in. I wasn't committed to it at all. I didn't really know where it was going to go. And it was just sort of like me and a mate sitting down, having a conversation and talking about films. Because I'm a huge film nerd and film lover, but also story lover. Anyway, fast forward, 2018, sort of did my own thing. 2019, got into real estate. Had a pretty horrible year, 2019. And towards the middle of 2019, I sort of tried getting my film career off the ground again with a business partner. But that didn't really work out too well. And while I was in real estate, I just burnt out, right? So... Yep. But during the whole process, I started doing some like movie reviews on Facebook and Instagram, and people started to like him. And a friend of mine actually DM'd me, and he goes, "One word, podcast?" ? And I've gone, I hadn't really thought about doing it again because once again, I knew that it was incredibly difficult to start a podcast. It's a lot of work, right? So I kind of was scared. I didn't really know what it was going to be, and but yeah, fast forward, the film business fell apart. I left real estate and I was sort of like in this limbo process of what to do next. And I went for a couple of job interviews at different companies, and none of them felt right. But this is a process of me actually learning to follow my intuition, my inner gut, my inner voice telling me you should do this, you shouldn't do this. And anyway, so I'm sitting down at one of Australia's top recruitment companies and with the CEO, and he's asking me this one question. He goes, "Why do you want to work here?" And I tell him straight up, I'm like, "I want to help people." And I didn't really understand to the kind of extent of what that really meant in that moment. All I was thinking about was, sure, I can help people get a job like I was doing with real estate, helping them get a property.
Yep.
So sort of carried over. But when I went home on the train, it sort of like this light bulb moment occurred to me. And I was like, that's it. I want to help people realize their own worth, because I struggled with that for pretty much all my life. And in 2019, I went through like one of the most horrendous years in my entire life. You know, if I was to go through and tick off all the things that I went through, it kind of like would shock some of you. But it was all a learning process that built up to that very moment. And I'm like, what if I started the Storybox 2.0, but this time with a renewed vision and mission behind it? So the vision has remained the same, but the mission has sort of changed over time as the Storybox has sort of evolved.
It's been refined.
Very refined, man. Yeah. And to be honest with you, in the very beginning, I wrote down a list of the kind of people, you know, my wish list, as I'm sure some of you do if you are podcasters. And I had like Tony Robbins was there, Matthew McConaughey was there, all these, Gabby Bernstein, all these incredible people that I had listened to on Lewis Howe's podcast, but never actually thought that I would have the opportunity to actually speak to any of them so close in to actually starting the Storybox. So when I officially began, there's a quick funny story. So my business partner was actually going to be the co-host of the podcast, but he ended up leaving the show because I'm a go-getter. I'm like one of those people that has an idea. I want to make it happen as soon as possible. So I started reaching out to just some of my friends to get this podcast off the ground. And I call him up the next day and tell him what I had done. And he goes, "I feel like the train's left and you've left me at the train station." And he chucks this massive adult tantrum. And I'm like, well, okay, fair enough. I'm giving you the opportunity to be part of something great here. you have a choice whether or not you want to stay or leave. He chose to leave. So I'm like, but that was the best thing that could ever happen to me and the story box, because if he had stayed, it wouldn't be what it is today, man.
Yeah.
Anyway, fast forwarding, I ended up getting a couple of my friends on the show, and around, no one knew that COVID would come around the corner.
Yep.
So I was doing in-person interviews with just hospitality industry people, which was ended up being great to start off with.
Yeah.
Because now I've got all these amazing connections and friendships.
Yeah.
And yeah, so that happened and COVID hit, and I've gone, how am I going to build this now? Anyway, everyone went to Zoom, and then the amazing blessing in all of it was there was a lot more people available now, because everyone was stuck in lockdown. I think that was the time that I first reached out to you.
Yeah.
I heard about you from Steph Claire Smith and all the work that she was doing. So I'm like, I'm going to try reach out to this guy. I think it was through Instagram or email. Never actually thought you'd get back to me. So for your audience, DK was one of the very first people to believe in me and the Storybox with what I was doing. He didn't ask me how many downloads I had, didn't ask me any of that. He was just like, yep, happy to come on, Jay, happy to have a chat. And that was back when I was like, I had my iPad, I wasn't able to get video. The audio was shot. It was terrible. But I realized something in those very few interviews. Stories matter. People's stories are valuable. You yourself, you have a story to share, but not many people want to actually share it for fear of, what others might think of them, vulnerability to take. So I learned in that very moment that with my story, I can relate to a lot of people with what they're going through. And I think that's one of the reasons why the Storybox has sort of grown over a period of time. I mean, it's not, massive by any stretch of the imagination. It's just been this gradual growth period over the last not even 18 months. So I hope in short that answered your question.
That's awesome, man. And, it often gets said that through adversity, that's where all the great things happen. And by the sounds of things, you mentioned 2019 was quite rough. I'm assuming now when you look back at it, at the time, it's probably like, why is this happening to me? All the questions everyone asks when they go through a rough time. But when you look back at it now, I can imagine that you're so glad that you went through it, and it's almost a blessing that you went through such a rough time, because realistically you may not be in a position or have the same mindset or the same drive that you probably do now if it wasn't for that tough year.
Definitely, man. And I say to people now that I am grateful for what I went through. I mean, it took a lot for me to actually get to that place where I can say that I'm blessed, because I am who I am today because of those struggles, because of those challenges, because of the rejection, because of those hard times. And now that I have this newfound level of respect for difficult moments that come my way, and you're going to get a ton of challenges in your life. That's going to be inevitable. But as Andrew Scipione, one of my very first guests, and a conversation I'll never forget, he said to me, you're going to go through pain. That's inevitable. But the way you show up to that pain, your reaction to it, that's optional. That's your choice.
Yeah.
So the way I react to challenges that are going to come through my way, and there's been some horrendous challenges that I'm sure a lot of people can relate to me on this level. I mean, abuse, mental, emotional, physical, sexual, you name it. All those are difficult things to navigate. And depression, anxiety, panic attacks, breakups, even, all this stuff. It's part of being a human though.
Yeah.
And I also say this, and this is what I've realized that I absolutely love. There's an amazing thing in failure, and we often don't see it in the failure, which is also another funny phenomenon. But you become stronger, you grow in failure. So don't be afraid to fail. Don't be afraid to go through all those crazy times. So yeah, once again, man, new level of appreciation.
It's interesting, right? I spoke with Dr. John DeMartini, and he talked about similar thing, right? He was pretty quick on his feet here. He used the example of the gym, right? That you go to the gym, you do a training session. The only way that your muscles can grow is if they're broken down, is if they are damaged. You have to damage the muscle tissue before it can grow and before it can get stronger and get bigger. So, and the same applies for life. And I also wanted to bring up the point that you kind of touched on when you spoke about starting a podcast, like from the outside in, and even for those that have maybe got a podcast or who are starting a podcast. And I get this a lot of the time with things like social media, and even those that are just starting in the health and fitness industry as a business. Everyone thinks that it's like the big dogs, or, it's like the people, like the big names that you want to get on the show. It's the big names that you want to associate yourself with. It's the big names that you want to be around, or that if you are seen associating with these people, then that means that you are successful. But a lot of the time, like, this is the facts that everyone has their own story. And a lot of the time, the people that you've probably never heard of, or the people that you see every day, or maybe it's the barista that you see go and get your coffee from every morning. Maybe it's the cleaner that you see at the airport, or whatever it is. Their story is often more powerful than the one that you've heard a million times from the famous person. And the same goes with business. It's networking. It's like every single opportunity I get, you mentioned before about how you reached out about the podcast. It's like any opportunity I get to network with someone who's clearly passionate about what they do, or is willing to, even speak to me and see it as an opportunity to do a podcast with me or learn from me. That's another opportunity in itself. And you never know where that networking could go. Often some of the biggest opportunities and blessings that I've had have come from conversations or meetings that I never expected would go anywhere. And it's kind of like, okay, we'll go and do this, or we'll catch up, or I may as well reach out to this person. And next thing you know, it leads to one of the biggest opportunities you've had, which is awesome. When now that I've just said that, I'm going to almost go back and eat my own words here. I'd love for you to share with the audience some of those bigger names that you have had on the show, because although it is really impactful to hear from people who have their own story, I think the listeners would get a lot of value out of maybe taking away some of the lessons that you've learned from some of these bigger name guests you've had on the Storybox show.
For sure, man. I think my dog's barking.
That's all right. Or they're going to have a bark off because Russ is going.
Yeah, sorry to your audience.
These guys can record their own podcast once we're done.
Tell me about it. But some of the big names that I've had on the show, I've had to bring up my list because there's so many. And, I will say before I mention some of them, for me, it's always about the relationship. Like, I've still kept up relationship with each and every one, or as much as I can, with these guests. I mean, you and I have still remained friends since last year, which has been great. Then social media has been helpful there.
Yeah.
But a lot of the other people have just, seen something with what I do and given me one of the biggest blessings ever. And so someone like Matthew McConaughey, for example, I mean, that's a story in of itself, getting him on the show. Tony Robbins, for example, I mean, Tony Robbins is one of the hardest people on the planet to actually get on a podcast, especially if you don't even have like a massive audience. Grant Cardone, he was one of the very first people as well. Les Brown, Joel McHale, Devon Franklin, Aubrey Marcus, Atticus Poetry, Mae Musk, Tim Grover, who's Michael Jordan's trainer, Lisa Nichols, Gabby Bernstein, Dr. Shafali, Justin Baldoni, Lindsay Sterling, Danica Patrick, Dr. Martha Beck.
Man, the list is insane. Where does this process start? Because again, this doesn't necessarily have to come back to being a podcast host, but for everyone listening, it could be, everyone has goals, everyone has dreams, everyone has aspirations. And a lot of the time it seems like it's too far-fetched, or it seems just too big and scary. And a lot of the time I was talking to a client yesterday about it. She was mentioning, how it just seems like the goal of getting back to her physical self, where she used to be, seems too big, it's too daunting because she's so far off that now. But all it takes is setting a goal for next week. All it takes is setting a goal for tomorrow or for today, ticking that off, as small as it may seem, and that momentum over time carries on and leads into bigger and better things. So let's use an example of someone like a Tony Robbins. How does that process start, and what steps need to be taken to even get the opportunity to get a response from him, let alone have him talk on the show?
I mean, so it's a good question. So a lot of people, obviously, they want the big names starting out. But honestly, if you don't have a big audience already, that's more than likely not even going to happen. So I had to, as a building process, man, like I had to build up to having Tony Robbins on the show. And as interesting as that is to like dive into, but these people, their time is so precious, it's so valuable that they don't want, because if they were to give every single man and their dog an opportunity and their time, then everyone would just have access to them, and then it just would just, I don't know. So for me, I had to go the struggle road to get Tony on the show, but it was an amazing journey. And sure, it came with its set of stresses, but all I did was at the start of the year, I found an email address and I started hounding that email address, I think every single week with a structured email that I didn't actually think would even hit. And I mean, Tony's people and publicity team, they get hundreds, if not thousands of emails a day. So why in the world would they look at mine all the way from Sydney, Australia? So I kind of kept that, the thing that I had learned from, reaching out to other people with the same thing. What's different about me? What's different about the story box that is going to make them want to get back to you? And even if they don't get back to you, that's still okay. But if they do, then you've got an in. You've got an opportunity. So use that opportunity. It wasn't until October of 2020 that I actually got an email from Tony's publicist. And she said, Jay, we don't have time with Tony at the moment, but keep in contact. I was thinking, that's fantastic. I mean, it's an opportunity. It's hope. But the amazing thing in all of that was I ended up having a relationship with this company. They ended up helping the Storybox grow even more. So it wasn't just about getting Tony Robbins. I ended up getting Ali Brooke. I ended up getting Tim Ballard. I ended up getting so many more people as a result. Peter Mallouk, who is Tony Robbins' co-writer for a number of his books, and just had these amazing conversations. It wasn't, I was focused on, okay, I'm doing this just so I can get Tony. No, it was every single person.
Everything that comes along with it.
Exactly. Everyone was valuable in every single conversation that I had. I didn't, I didn't treat anyone differently. So who I was as I was showing up to each interview was just it. Come, I think it was December, in the process, it's funny because I had to get Matthew McConaughey before I got Tony Robbins. That came first actually. But when I got Matthew McConaughey, I shared the episode with his team, with Tony Robbins' team. And I said, what do you think of this conversation? And because Matthew and I had this incredible conversation, they loved it. And they said, having about this kid, we're going to give him a chance. So Tony had a publicity day. And most of the time you can only get people like this when they're doing press days, which is limited to the amount of either podcast, media, you name it, that they let in. And I was on the list. I was given that opportunity because this publicist, a lovely lady, gave me an opportunity. She went into bat for me. And I also say that I was damn persistent. Like I did not give up. Even when there was like a couple of no's along the way, I just didn't give up. I kept them updated all the time with what I was doing, the numbers, you name it, whatever it is. So that was really the process. And to be honest with you, man, it was all about the relationship, building it. That was more valuable than just merely getting a name so you can build a podcast. Because I noticed something interesting after it. My life didn't radically change. My podcast didn't radically change after I got him. I thought it would.
Yeah, we spoke about this before we hit record. Yeah.
So that's really it, man.
That's awesome, man. You're completely right, because it's all well and good. Yeah, I think it's almost like you compare this to, let's say, this is a very odd comparison, but you compare it to like professional athlete, right? Like they put all this work in to make it. So you talk about someone making it to the AFL. Player makes it to the AFL, and you have two different types of people. You have one person that thinks, "Oh, I'm here. That's it. I've made it." Or you have the other person that goes, "All right, now the work starts. This is where the journey really starts." So for you, it's like you get that no, or you get that response email, or even you get Tony, right? And it's not like, "Oh, fantastic, I've got Tony now." Cut off communication. Thanks, guys. Cheers for that. Now I've got Tony. I don't really need you guys. It's more so like, as you said, how can we continue to build this relationship? And that's, to me, honestly, that's probably something that I've gained the most value out of with my own podcast throughout the years of running the show. It's like, I now have some incredible friendships and networks because of the people I've had on the show. And it's like, how can I offer you value in return? It's about checking back in 6 months later or a few months later to see how you're doing, and doing whatever you can to offer them value as well, which I think is such an important thing in any form of relationship. It needs to work both ways. It can't just be one way. Like, they've given you the blessing of giving you your time, like you said before. So now you need to return the favor in some way or another.
That's it, man. I mean, you said it. Like, for me, I don't see myself as someone special at all. I'm just a normal human being that has got a story, and I want to help others. And I think it's people are searching for that genuine, authentic connection, rather than it's sort of like, okay, I'm going to bring you on the show so then I can just run through a bunch of questions so I can use your name as leverage to get to another name. It's not about that for me. And I think people also realize that too. There's like this huge vetting process nowadays as well, because every man and their dog is reaching out to the same people.
Yeah.
And you've got to, what's your niche? What's different about you? If you want to get these people attention, then just be, number one, reach out. Don't be afraid to reach out. But secondly, don't act like you are perfect. Don't act like you're special, because you're not. Like, no one is.
I think as well, it's almost like a sense of entitlement.
Yeah.
You know, like, why would you or I expect Tony Robbins to say yes? It's like, it's fair. Like, if we have a goal, if we have an ambition, it's fair to have disappointment, and that's just part of life. But as you said, like, I know that's fine. It's just a stepping block. It's just part of the journey. Whereas a lot of people, I think, almost take every no to heart, take it fully personally. It's like, oh, the road's over. Like, this is it. Why wouldn't they say yes? Or like, it's like, almost, as I said, why would someone that has a much bigger audience than you or I, or has that their time is their most valuable asset? Like, you have to understand that there needs to be a reason for them to say yes. What, out of all these incredible people you had on, and regardless of whether they've been a big name or not, like, let's just say all of the guests, and this is a pretty loaded question, I guess, but what do you think have been probably, say, three of the biggest lessons that you've taken away from the guests that you've had on the show?
Kindness speaks volumes. Don't be afraid to be vulnerable. And thirdly, use rejection as opportunity to progress forward. Don't get stuck. Don't allow the rejection to cripple you, which often happens. Sure, it sucks in the moment, but use it as fuel. Use it as fire to keep that furnace burning, like the wood. You need that. So for me, those would be the three lessons, especially kindness. Just the amount of people that have shown me kindness over this journey is, honestly, it's one of the most humbling things I can ever mention to anyone, because it just shows me that there are people out there who give a damn about me and about what I'm trying to do, my mission, my vision, all that sort of stuff. So if they can be kind to me, what's stopping me from being kind to someone else? Now, that could have different levels, right? It can mean that I give financially. It means I can give my time. Time is the most valuable asset that we have. So if you are showing me kindness by giving me your time, how can I reciprocate that? How can I give back to you and show you that I valued that? So I'm always mindful of this. When if a young person asks me, hey, Jay, what advice would you give me here? I don't say no. I mean, I'm
exactly the same.
Always able to say, hey, I'm not perfect in any way, shape or form, but I'm more than happy to lend a helping hand if I can. And if I can't, I will say I can't. I'm just being open and honest and vulnerable and I'm not afraid to be vulnerable now either.
And you think as well about the ripple effect of that one act of kindness. I often think about, let's say you're down at your local cafe, and it could be something as simple as just a smile and a, hey, how are you? Or have a good day. And all of a sudden that person who may have been in a shitty mood before, or maybe having a bad day, that kindness then gives them the positivity, which then may lead to them being nice to their kids or being nice to someone else, which then leads, like, the ripple effect is huge. So that one small act of kindness can have such a big impact.
Gratitude.
Yeah, 100%. You mentioned vulnerability. Something that I had in mind that I wanted to ask you on the show today is, you obviously share so many other people's stories and what's helped them be successful and what their mission is. What do you think is one of your biggest vulnerabilities or something that makes you super uncomfortable? And I guess, what are you doing, if anything, on a daily basis to battle that or to kind of tackle it head on?
I love that you asked this question because there are a number of things. The first one, and this may shock people because I run a podcast, so I'm talking all the time. It's actually, I'm quite ashamed of my voice, and I didn't like it for many, many years. I hated hearing the sound of my own voice. And also I thought that no one would want to ever hear me talk because I thought, and this is once again, it's just a thought. It's not a belief, but I believed it for many, many years until I chose to get rid of it. But that's another, I'll get to that in a moment. But for many, many years, I believed that my voice and the things that I was saying didn't have any worth or value attached to it. That my story wasn't anything unique or there was nothing good about it. So I hid. And that only led me to depression, anxiety, panic attacks, attempting suicide. It only led me to some very, very dark places. Until, when I started the podcast, I just kept quiet most of the time. I shut myself off and said, I'm just going to ask the questions. I'm not even going to really interact. But it's interesting because when I got Tony, when I got Matthew, when I got all these people, someone that was very close to me, and I respected his opinion. He called me up one day and he goes, no one wants to hear you talk. No one wants to hear your story. They're only there for the guest. And I thought that hurt. Like it really, really impacted me. And I thought, why did it impact me so much? Was it because this person I love and respected? Or was it because my ego was getting in the way? And I realized that it was mostly towards my ego. I had this prideful attitude around it so I had to really dive into why those words hurt me so much. And when I remove the ego, and this is a daily practice, by the way, I get up every single morning and say, okay, God, what can you teach me that I have not learned yesterday? I need you to give me the strength today to manage my thought processes that don't become negative beliefs. And that is a difficult thing to do. But when you create a daily habit and you're persistent at it, I have this saying, be persistent to remain consistent at the things that you want, and you will get there. And I wake up every single day, pretty much the same time, and I exercise. I do meditation and prayer.
Yep.
I go out in nature. Normally, people go to the gym. I go out in nature where that's just works for me. And I listen to podcasts. I listen to things that are going to get me in a good mood. And this is a good habit for me to go in and say, Jay, if you have your ego today, then you're going to feel miserable. No one's going to want to talk to you because, you're stuck up and proud and arrogant, self-righteous. Just come down a notch, be humble, and just accept who you are for being who you are.
Yeah.
I think that's a big message that a lot of people need to understand and start believing for themselves, is that love of self, is that acceptance of self, is that knowing that doesn't matter. We've all got quirks. And for me, I thought it was my voice, but it's fine. Like my perspective has since changed, and I probably talk too much now. It's too much for my own good, but I think it's a good thing.
It's interesting, like you talk to, because not exactly the same, but I used to be quite similar, especially when I had someone on the show who did have quite a big profile, who was quite accomplished. You kind of feel like, why, like I should talk as little as possible, because why would anyone listening want to hear what I have to say when I'm talking to someone like this? And also, why would this person want to know about what I have to think about the topic that we're talking about? But you start to learn, and when you talk to these people that are super accomplished, you start to notice a bit of a trend. They very often bring it back to you. You know what I mean? You ask them a question and they'll give you their thoughts or their answer, but they'll often ask you your opinion as well. And I was doing a course this week, and the topic this week was around leadership. And it was brought up that great leaders are great at listening and asking good questions.
Yes.
Which I thought was super powerful. You mentioned the morning routine or your daily routine. And again, I love how you mentioned that for you, it means getting out in nature and listening to podcasts. Because I think now with morning routines and even to an extent, things like exercise and even nutrition, like people just look at what everyone else is doing and think that that's what they need to adopt to their own lifestyle. I talk about my morning routine quite a lot and how it's evolved over the years, but it's also super important to not just hear what Jay has to say or hear what I have to say and then go home and do that exact same thing and expect it to have the same impact on you. For you, it could be just listening to a podcast. It could be going out and training. It could be meditating, journaling, whatever it may be. It all comes down to what's going to allow you to be your best self for that day and for every day, which I think is incredibly important. Where do you hope to see the Storybox podcast go? Are you hoping to get back into the film side of things? And in a second before we wrap up, I want to touch on the path of an eagle as well, the book that you've written. So yeah, where do you hope to take the podcast?
I hope it, and this is from the very, very beginning, and this may seem like a crazy goal or dream, whatever, but I know it's possible. And if it's anything that I've seen with this journey is that it is possible. It's just about timing. It's just about being patient and waiting on not my timing, but if you want to use the universe or God's timing. And I wanted to reach as many people, if not every single person on this planet, with a story, because every story in the universe, in the world, that matters. And if one story can touch the heart and life of someone that is remote, then that's what I want the Storybox to do. I don't want it to become the most popular or the biggest, although selfishly I thought in the very beginning that I was going to be better than Joe Rogan's and all that stuff.
But who knows?
That to me, man, doesn't really bother me anymore. See, I got to the top of the charts. I got to, number 4 on education on Apple Podcasts, and I felt great for a couple of seconds. And I'm like, now what? But for me, it's about when someone messages me and says, Jay, I loved hearing this story. This helped me. Then that makes me feel grateful for the ability to do what I do on a daily basis. And the fact that I don't give up. I'm a stubborn bugger. I'm persistent as heck. And I just want it to reach as many people as I possibly can, man. And I won't ever stop until that ever happens or until God takes me home.
Yeah, man. I think something that's going to really help that cause for you is the book, The Path of an Eagle. So when did you decide you wanted to write a book? How was the process? And then also where can the listeners get access to it so they can see all the work and time you put into writing the book?
So the book's not out yet. I'm still on a journey of getting it published, but who knows what's going to happen down the line. Some awesome things have happened in the process of this journey, but I didn't want to write a book. Believe it or not. I mean, back in 2000, I think it was 18, I sort of, things didn't really go in my favor. And then with a relationship, and then 2019 hits around and the relationship ended.
Yep.
And then as a way of sort of processing all the pain, I just wrote this crazy, it wasn't even a book, man. It was just, I thought it was a book. And I told you before, I spent a year writing what I didn't want to say and a year writing what I needed to say.
Yeah.
And there's this distinction there because for an entire year, I wrote out of pain. I wrote out of selfish thinking that I was going to become a New York Times bestselling author, you name it, all in that that process. I'm like, this is amazing.
Mm-hmm.
And then I had someone read it and they're like, what the heck is this? They had no idea what it was. Back then,
was that almost writing from ego, almost like what you spoke about before?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I didn't have the reader in mind. I had myself in mind selfishly. I had my own wants and desires in mind, not what, hey, how can I serve you? How can I help you here? But the path of an eagle wasn't called the path of an eagle to start off with. It was called in failure, you learn humility. And yet here I was writing a book when I wasn't actually humble.
Yeah.
I was egotistical.
Yeah.
So I stopped writing it about halfway through.
You were writing the second attempt at the book while you were writing the first one.
Exactly. That's right, man. And it's actually a funny story because I stopped writing this book and I had an idea for another book. So I started writing the other book while I had the first book that I had started just sitting there doing absolutely nothing.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, no, I need to go back to the first book and revisit it.
Mm-hmm.
I was scared to do it, man. I'm like, this is not going to go anywhere. What is it? But yeah, anyway, long story short, I ended up writing the book that has become The Path of an Eagle, How to Overcome and Lead After Being Knocked Down. And it's just like, once again, it's just been this incredible journey of learning. I was telling my mum this the other day. I should never have titled it learning to overcome and lead after being knocked down, because that's really been this journey of even getting the book to agents or publishing houses. It's just a lot of rejection that has come along with it. But as they say, Paulo Coelho from The Alchemist, he was told that by a publisher that his book wouldn't go anywhere, but he said, I believed in my work.
Yeah.
Enough. And now look at it. It's like one of the biggest selling books. I'm not saying that's going to be my book, but I'm saying there's a message in there.
You're doing it for the right reasons. Yeah.
Do it for the right reasons and don't give up.
Man, that's awesome. I'm so excited to eventually get my hands on it and have a read of it. I mean, look, I've loved our chat today, and I hope that once it is published, we can maybe come back and have another chat and do part 2 and talk about the response and even the lessons that you learn out of that, because I'm sure there'll be plenty more lessons learned by the time it's published. And look, man, again, I want to thank you for having me on the show last year. I'm glad that we've been able to connect like we spoke about through today's episode. You never know what possibilities or relationships can come from networking with people that you may not necessarily know or know what's going to come of it. But again, man, thanks for coming on the show. I've loved our chat, and all the best to you. You're doing incredible things and impacting so many people, which is a massive credit to you.
Thank you, brother. I really do appreciate your influence and the kind of messages you're sending out there to people. Really appreciate you, man. So thank you so much.
Absolute pleasure, man. And for everyone who's tuned into today's episode, I'm certain that you've gained a ton of value from this episode with Jay. So we'd love for you to take a screenshot of today's episode, post on your Instagram story for us, tag myself, tag Jay, check out the Storybox podcast. I'll make sure to have the links to all of Jay's socials and the podcast in the show notes. Again, Jay, thank you. And for everyone who's tuned in, a massive thank you to you as well.